recently that our programming is going to be called Healthy Families, Strong Communities. And the goal there is to gain buy-in of the communities we're working in and to make it a common goal, right? Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about how the rigid gender norms that you found in the research impact development generally and here in Kurdistan? How do they impact families? How do they impact the development of Kurdistan?
Yeah, I mean, here and everywhere, that keeping women out of the paid workforce, limiting women's movement, is so obvious a setback for any part of the world. And economists have done the numbers of what it means if women are working outside the home at numbers equal to men, what that means to economies. The projections go from 10 to 30% of growth. There is no economic investment that tends to bring the kind of return that investing in women, being fully accessible, being able to access the workplace as much as men. So first off, if you're a Ministry of Development or the economy, first invest in women, and then we'll talk about all the rest. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an obvious one. I think if we look as well at I gave some examples from the health field. We've done estimates in countries, again, doing the kind of a health economics investment, measuring the impact of harmful gender norms on men in terms of lost life, violence, and violence against women. And it comes to billions of US dollars or whatever currency you measure. The harm in people's lives is obvious, but we can also measure just what it means in the economies of households. So there's both the physical impact of that violence, the psychological impact, and there's an economic effect of it as well. So I think, to us the question is, it's the cost of inaction that perhaps we need to talk about. This pays forward in so many ways. And I think another piece as we talk about development is that it's not only the quality of do we grow an economy, but the well-being of households. And I think that's what this study shows as well, and what Cody mentioned of having done this research in more than 50 countries, where men believe in more equitable views of gender. Their female partner reports being happier with that relationship. He reports being happier with it. He is also healthier, and his mental health is better. So not only does this pay forward in terms of the economic development, but it also leads to well-being and happiness, which is kind of what we're all ultimately after.
Great. Thank you so much. So this next phase of our partnership is really focused on group work with adult men, with adolescent boys. Can you talk a little bit about how it's worked in other countries, what you've seen, how it will work practically, and how do you see that change occurring, and how do you think we can sustain that change here in Kurdistan?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the question is often asked: what is work with men for gender equality? What does it look like? Most of our successful approaches have been starting conversations with men about these issues, and that can be in the workplace, that can be in schools, it can be in after-school programming, that can be at the community level, that can be in displaced persons camps, refugee camps, wherever we can find a space where men are willing to have these conversations. Now, most men, when we can get these conversations going, most men will find, wow, I have never been able to talk about this before, because we are taught as men that these ideas about manhood are unquestionable. It's as if they're written into our code as men, and we're not supposed to stop and ask them. But when we can stop and ask them, most men say, wow, I really do appreciate being able to talk about this, and to find how I can both be a better partner, a better father if I'm a father, but also just be better to myself in terms of how I treat my own body and when I seek help when I need it, etc. The issue becomes who owns this work. And I think that's where the really crucial part, when it works, is there are key NGOs, there are government ministries that say, we see the utility of this and we build it into what we do, whether that's in the health sector, whether that's prevention work we already do in gender-based violence. So really, I mean, I get to turn this question around to you. With all the amazing community-based work that SEED is doing, how can we ensure this work is not just another add-on to what you're doing, but if it works well, it should begin to say there's enough men and women seeing that it produces positive results, and will feel a sense of ownership in the work. We have in other settings, including in the Middle East, we have invested a lot of time and resources into impact evaluation, where we've done the complicated kind of randomized control trials. Well, you'll have some families who don't get the intervention, some who do. We'll measure at the end of 3 months or 6 months or a year what happened as a result. And we've had very positive results. In the intervention group, reduced family violence, reduced violence by men against their female partners, reduced violence against children, increased participation by men in caregiving activities, increased support of him for his partner's participation in the workplace. And we measured that not to say, oh, isn't this good, aren't we smart and know how to do this, but to say, ethically, we need to show that this work has an impact. If we're to spend these resources to do this work, we should be able to show that. Our work finds that, our experience finds that it can work. And the key to it becomes when enough men and women say, we've seen it work, we believe in it, and we're now the champions and promoters of it.
Fantastic. And so I think you've underlined one of the things that we're striving for here is to use evidence-driven approaches, proven approaches that have worked in similar contexts to Kurdistan. And I know that one of the recent reports that you did or applications of this was in Lebanon, which I would describe as a pretty similar context to here. And is there anything you can share about the work in Lebanon that you think can make us a little bit hopeful about how we'll find those engagements working here?
Yeah. One we can say with Lebanon, we've been partnering now for probably 7 years.
Okay.
And so one, I think, is we have to acknowledge this is not one round of training and we're done. Or just we look at our current programming and say, yeah, add healthy masculinities and do a check and we're done. That it took time to build a cadre or a group of promoters who see the utility of the work, who feel invested in it, who had the opportunity to test it in a few community settings, and then who had the chance to then bring in government partners and have a cycle of activities that have taken place together with the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Women's Affairs, Ministry of Social Development, building this into activities already happening in schools or as part of services for women survivors of violence. And so that's when the real proof of concept happens, when the government partnerships have started. And now there's a group of men and women who have gone through the activities and have made them theirs. This is no longer Equimundo's Program H or Program Raw work. This is Abad's work together with the government. But I think it is key to say this is not just one cycle and we're done. I think it is a longer term commitment to see the impact happen.
Fantastic. So we have found that men are receptive to messaging around wanting to be loved and respected within their family, and not feared, and that everybody will be happier within their family when there is mutual respect. Can you tell us a little bit about how receptive men and boys are to participating in these groups? Can we expect any backlash? Do you think that we will need to convince men to join the groups? And what have you experienced there with resistance in other programming that you've done?
Yeah. So I think it is important to acknowledge these conversations are not easy to get started. Lots of men and women as well, right? When we say, hey, let's question how we have constructed our household lives for the last centuries, or how we've constructed who gets to be in charge, is frightening. Which is why the word feminist and women's rights is frightening to particularly to lots of men who are used to having power and having power without being questioned. So let's, first off, I think it is important to say these are challenging conversations, which is why the kind of training of facilitators over the past week is really important to talk through how do we start this conversation? How do we do it in ways that don't cause harm? Because we can see sometimes men get defensive. And sometimes defensive men can cause even more harm. So I think we do start these activities always believing we must have an approach of do no harm. Let us make sure that we're having them carefully. Let us make sure that as we're calling out men's abuses of power, we're also ready that there could be a backlash. But I think what is important as well is to create the kind of safe space that we've been doing in the last week, where men feel like they can have these conversations. I think it's also important to say we do them in partnership with women. So it's not just that we somehow men promise to do 3 or 4 things different and we're done, but that we make sure there's a constant dialogue, that we as men have to be brave enough to be held accountable for, are we living up to the changes that we're promoting? And the other part I think is key is to say, the research that Cody cited, we have done these surveys that we call images, the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. We've carried these out now in more than 50 countries. There's always at least 1 in 4 men, 1 in 3 men, sometimes half of men in a country who say, I generally believe in gender equality. I believe women are my equal, and I believe I should do some things to support that. So we could go in and say, well, the bad news is that 3/4 of men are opposed. But it means I've got 1 in 4 men in the audience, or in a group, or in a discussion, or in the community who already are on our side. So I think that's why the kind of qualitative research that we did together here is also trying to find spaces where men are already beginning to believe that supporting gender equality is a good thing. So we're not parachuting in from someplace. We're building on the men in Kurdistan or wherever else we do this who already think gender equality is a good thing, and they exist. We don't have to make that up.
Great.
Yeah.
Our idea with this program is that we can prove that this intervention works and is effective and has impact, and then share it more broadly for others to also roll out and use, because we think the need for this kind of engagement across all of Iraq is much needed. And you mentioned that this is a long-term programming, long-term investment. How over time, in your other partner countries, have you sustained this intervention over 7 years? Do you roll it out to more and more people? Are there ways to, as you said, bring it through existing institutions in the country? How has that worked in other places to sustain the impact of these interventions?
I mean, it's much of what you're already doing. We started the morning talking to a group of social work students, quite a few very committed to this topic. One of the young men social work students at the end saying, I want to do this. This is my career. I'm committed to this. I think one, it's having a group of individuals, and it helps to have men who are part of this as well, saying, we believe in this and want to be part of it, and they're just starting their career and hope that they will want to make it. So one is investing in youth leadership to carry it along. We do a lot of partnerships, and I think there may be some folks here from UNFPA or UN Women.
That's right.
We do a lot of partnership with the UN as well, because governments may often turn over in a couple of years, but having the partnerships with the UN of colleagues there who say, we support this. When there's a change in government, we'll be there to remind them as part of what happens there, we'd like to include it. We have government representatives here as well. We as NGOs we offer ideas, we implement some things, but really it's your role to see that these are taken to scale. They become part of your budgets. So I think it's all the above. We use research a lot as well to make the case that change is possible, that women and men both report benefits from this. Engaging media has been something we've done lately, both calling out the media for reinforcing negative stereotypes, but also engaging the media to say, there's really good stories here that you should be telling. And I think ultimately to trust that, who becomes, probably the key advocates and allies in this work is the women who have been leading it for a very long time, whether at the community level or at the national level, saying, we see the need and the results when we engage men as allies in this work. So I think that partnership as well with the key women's rights groups, that it's been key wherever we've done this. So it's not like this standalone work with men and boys, but that it's in partnership with the women's rights NGOs who really have led this, this work.
Great. That's fantastic. So that is the end of my questions. So I'm going to open it up to the audience to hear what the experts say. And I'd like to start with our Director General of DCVAO, Fennec Shafiq, who is the leading institution in the Kurdistan Regional Government, which is the response to gender-based violence. And for a couple of years now, DCVAO has been inviting us to participate with them to do prevention work, especially in the schools. And we hope that once we prove this methodology, this is something that we can work with DCVAO to roll out in the schools. So, Fennec, I leave the opening word to you. You can speak in Kurdish, and we have translation. Okay. Sure.
So, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for this invitation and this good discussion about how can we participated with or engaging men and boy to participate. وكوي كشيري خان قوتي ماوي شي دور درجة ما إجلسر gender based violence دكين لبروي لولاتك خمان دزانين بواقع حالك أو جوية كبيا وبريار درو جنيش زي بزيكاري بروسكانا. Sorry. Sorry.
Need translation.
Yeah, so
You do also? Yeah, you know.
Because I saw it's better to send my message better. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I don't need it. Thank you. It is for you because I am talking in Kurdish. باسم لەوەی کرد گوتم لە وڵاتەکەی ما عادەتەن وایە کە پیاوان بڕیاردەرن ژنان جێبەجێکارن لە بۆ زۆر بەشتەکان هەیە بە تایبەتی لە ناو خێزانەکاندا لێ ئێمە لە بەڕێوەبەرایەتێکی خۆمان باسمان لەوەی کرد چۆن وا بکەین لە ناو خێزان لە ناو مەکتەبەکان لە ناو جامیعەکان دەست بە پرۆسەی وێ بکەین کە پیاوان و کوڕانیش بێن بەشداری بکەن لەوەی کە چۆن تونند و تیژیەکان کەم دەکەینەوە لە کۆمەڵگایەکە ئێمە بۆیە کە ڕێکخراویست بە سوپاسەوە کە هات سەردانیا کردین باسمان لەوەی کرد چۆن وا بکەین ئێمە لەگەر وەزارەتی پەروەردە کار ئاسانی بکەین و سیدیش و ڕێکخراوەکانی دیکەشمان لەگەڵ بێ لەوەی کە هەم منهەجێکمان هەبی لە ناو خوێندن هەم لە عینن کاتیشا بەشداری بکەین لە کۆبوونەوەکانی دایک و باوکان لە بەرەوەی کە دەرێن دایک و باوکان لەوەی باوکانیش ڕۆڵی خۆیان لە پەروەردەکردنی منداڵەکانیان ببین و بتوان ئیشەکانی خۆیان بکەن لەگەروەش باسمان لەوەی کرد چۆن لە هەموو مەکتەبەکان بتوانین هۆشیاری بڵاو بکەینەوە بۆ کوڕان و کچان چونکە کوڕان و کچان لە مەرحەلەیەکی وا بەتایبەتی لە پۆلی حەوت کە دەکاتە عمریان 12 ساڵیە تووشی تونند و تیژی دەبن بەڵام چۆن وا بکەن خۆیان فێر بن خۆیان بپارێزن پریڤێنشن بن لەوەی خۆیان پارێزن چۆن بەرەنگاری تونند و تیژیەکان دەبنەوە بە تایبەتی تێبگەن کوڕەکان پێش کچەکان چۆن دوور بکەونەوە لە تونند و تیژی بەرامبەر بە کچان و لە عین کاتیە خۆیان پارێزن لە بەرەوەی بەداخەوە هەست دەکەین لە کۆمەڵگاکەمان ئێستا کوڕانیش زیاتر بەرەنگاری تونند و تیژی دەبنەوە لەوەی کەسانی گەورە بەرامبەریان دەکرێتن لە هەمان کاتشدا پێمان باش بوو مامۆستایەکان و بەحسی ئیجتیماعیەکانیش لە ناو مەکتەبەکان ئەوانیش ڕۆڵی خۆیان ببینن ژنەکان و پیاوەکان پێش ژنەکان لە بەرەوەی قەناعەتی پیاوان بەبوونی مافی ژنان و بوونی جەندەر ئیکواڵەتی و بوونی ئەوەی چۆن خۆیان بپارێزن لە تیژەکان بە تایبەتی بە تەلەبەکانی خۆیان ڕابگەێنن ئەوە ڕۆڵی ئێمە دەبیتن کە بتوانین هۆشیاریەکی تەواو بدەینە مامۆستایەکان بدەینە بەحسی ئیجتیماعیەکان داوایمان کرد کە بتوانین دەورەیان لۆ بکەینەوە لە دەورەکانیان فێری ئەویان بکەین کە کوڕان و کچان بەشداری پێ بکەن لەوەی خۆیان بە دوور بگرن لە تونند و تیژیەکان چۆن بتوانینەوەیەکی وا لە مستەقبەلا بتوان بە ئێرێنی فکر بکەنەوە لە ناو کۆمەڵگایەکەی خۆمانەوە دوایی دەگەینە مەرحەلەی ناو جامیعە بەداخەوە برادرەمان باسی لەوەی کرد کە پیاوان هەندێک جار دەسەڵاتەکانی خۆیان بەکاردێنی لۆی تونند و تیژی بەرامبەر بە کچان و بەژنان بکەن بە تایبەتی لە ناو جامیعەکان ئەوەمان زۆر دیتیە پێدانی دەرەجەیەکی باشە بە تەلەبەیەک یاخود مەسەلەن مراعاتکردنەکی لە حالەتێکی وا کەواتە پێمان باش بۆ بین لە ناو جامیعەکانیش دەست پێ بکەین هۆشیاریان بکەینەوە بەوەی کە جەندەر ئیکواڵەتی یعنی چی بەوەی کە بزانین GBV بە چی شێوازێک دەڕواتن چۆن بزانین تەمەشاکردنێک دەست لێدانێک قسەکردنێک هەڕەشەیەک هەر تەلمی حەکە هەبیتن کچان کوڕان تێبگەێنین بە هۆشیاریکردنەوە بەڵام ئەوە بەتەنیا بە ئێمە ناکرێ دەبی هەموو کۆمەلگا تاک بە تاک تێیدا بەشدار بی لێیە ئەو مامۆستایانە هەر دەبژێرین کە باوەڕیان هەیە بە قەزیەی جەندەر ئیکواڵەتی و بەوەی کە چۆن توندوتیژی کەمکەنەوە لە هەمان کات کە سیمینارەکان بکەین بتوانین کەسانی چالاک هەر بژێرین بۆی بتوانین لە مستەقبەلی نزیکە ساڵێکی دیکە دو ساڵی دیکە چاڵ تو چاڵ بەکاربێنین لە ناو مەکتەبەکان بتوانین لە ناو جامیعەکانە کچان لەگەر کچان چۆن حیمای یەکتری دەکەن کوڕان لەگەر کوڕەکان عینشت بۆی وا بکرێتن هەموو تاک لە تاچی کۆمەلگا هاوکار و هاوەش بیتن لەوانەیە بتوانین گروپەکی چالاکیش دروست بکەین لەوەی ئیدامە سستەینەبڵەتی بە پرۆژەکانی خۆمان بدەین چکە ناکرێ ئێمە بڵێین هەموو کاتێک پێویستمان بە ئینتەرناشناڵەکانە بە یوئێنەکانە کە بتوان بێن لێرە بکەن بەڵام ئەبێ بیر لە ئیدامەی پرۆژەکانمان بکەنەوە بەڵام لە کاتی ئێستادا پێویست دەکاتن ئەو خبرە و ئەکسپریەنسانەی کە تازە جەنابەت باست کرد باست لە لوبنان کرد بەڵێ لەوانەیە کۆمەلگای لوبنان بە ئێمە بچیتن بەڵام ئێمەش جیاوازیەکمان هەر هەیە لە گەروان ئوردون و میسر لەوانەیە هەبیتن لەوانەیە توندوتیژیەکانی کە لە ئەمریکای دەکرێت بۆ نمونە هەمان شێوازی بیتن لە حالەی نەفسی کە هەیە بەڵام جیاوازیەکی شەیە لە شێوازەکانی شێری خان باسی لەوەی کرد زۆربەی کوشتنەکانمان ئێمە لەسەر شەرەفە ئایا تێگەیشتین لە وشەی شەرەف کەواتە پێویست دەکات جارێکی دیکە بین کۆمەلگاکەی خۆمان تێبگەینەوە وشەی شەرەف بەرەو چێندە دەڕواتن ئایا شەرەف تەنها ژنە یاخود کە پیاوەک دێ ئیستیغلالی جنسی و یان ڕێی بدەکا یان شتێک دەکاتن تەنها ژنەکە دەبی لۆمە بکرێتن یان پیاوەکەش دەبی سزای خۆی بدرێ ئەگەر سزای خۆی دەکرێتن ئایا کۆمەلگا بە چ نەزرەیەک تەمەشای ژنەکەش و پیاوەکەش دەکاتن یەک لە شتەکانی دیکەش کە هەمانە چۆن ئەوانە بە یاسا بکرێتن لە یاسایەکانمان چووکە هەموو کاتێک گوتومانە یاسا لە بۆ ڕێخستنی کۆمەلگایە کەواتە کە یاسایەکە هەبوو ڕێنماییەکانیش دەتوانین لەسەری جێبەجێ بکرێتن دەتوانی تاک بە تاچی کۆمەلگاش هۆشیار بکەینەوە لە مافەکانی خۆی بە تایبەتی کە ئێستا باز لە تەنها مافی ژن ناکەین باز لە مافی کچانیش و باز لە مافی کوڕانیش دەکەین و باز لە مافی پیاوانیش دەکەین چونکە هەر لە کۆمەلگاکەیمە یەکێتی پیاوانمان هەیە کە یەکێتی پیاوانمان هەیە بە معنای وەی پیاوانیش توندوتیژیان بەرامبەر دەکرێتن ئایا ئەو توندوتیژیانە ژنێک بەرامبەریان دەیکا یان پیاوێک دەیکاتن یان لە بواری ئابوووریەکە دەکرێت لەگەری یاخود ئیستیغلالی سوڵتەیە لەلایەن کەسانێکی دیکە کە ئەوانەش دێنەوە بابەتی جیاواز لەو ئەوانەی هەیە لۆیە دەستخۆشتان لێ دەکەم ئەڵێن پێویست دەکاتن کاتی وەی هاتیە کە پیاوان و کوڕان پێش کچان و ژنان دەبی تێبگاتن لە مافەکان دەبی تێبگاتن لە جۆرەکانی توندوتیژی دەبێ بە هەمووشمان بزانین کە چۆن وقای کۆمەلگایەکە خۆمان دەکەین چکە دەرێن ئەلوقایە خێرن من عیلاج واتە ئەبێ پاراستن پێش چارەسەر دابنین چونکە کە شتێک هاتە سەروی کە چارەسەر بکرێ بە معناوی کەیسەکەمان لە دەستدایە توندوتیژیەکە کرایە بەرامبەری بەڵام چۆن وا بکەین لە ئێستاوە لە ئایندەیەکی نزیکە بەوەی کە حکومەت وەکو دەسەڵاتدار بێ لە سەر یاسایەکان ئیشی خۆی بکاتن پیاوانی ئاینی بێن هۆشیارکردنەوەی خەڵک بکەن مامۆستایانی زانکۆ بێن ئەو دەسەڵاتێکە هەیە بە جوانترین شێوە بەکاری بن نەک ئیستیغلالی بکەن لە بۆ حالەتی توندوتیژی لە هەمان کاتدا دایک و باوکیش فەرق و جیاوازی لە مابەینی کوڕان و کچان نەکەن و کۆمەلگاش بە نەزرەیەکی جوانتر سەیری ژن بکاتن چونکە هەرچی شتێک کە ڕوو دەدا لە توندوتیژیەکان دەست لە بۆ ژنەکان درێژ دەکەن لە بۆ پیاوەکان ناکەن کە دەرێن پیاوەکان بە معنای ئەو کەسانە کە توندوتیژیەکانیان کردیە بۆیە لەسەر ئەساسە پێویستمان بەوەی لە ئێستادا هەمومان بەیەکەوە هاوکار و هەماهەنگی یەکتری بین هاوکار بین لەوەی کە بتوانین فەندڕێیزین بکەین بۆ دەرەوە لە بەرەوەی پێویستمانە لە ئێستادا و پێویست بۆش دەکاتن هەم NGOەکانیش و هەم دەسەڵاتدار و لایەنە پەیوەنددار لە حکومەت هەم تاک بە تاچی کۆمەلگا هۆشیار بێ بەرامبەر ئەو حالەتەی کە هەمانە و زۆر سپاسان دەکەم هەر پرسیارێکی شەوی بەسەر چاو دەتوان جواب دەمەوە زۆر سپاس.
Thank you. Thank you, Fana Khan. Gary, there was so much there to respond to. I'm gonna leave it to you to respond to what. Thank you.
I mean, first off, just to support, just repeating the message that violence is preventable. That I think it is easy to, as we focus on services, which we must, to think that, well, some men will just be bad and do that and there's nothing we can do, we just must protect women. But the importance of emphasizing, no, this is preventable violence. And we focus a lot on what happens to boys early on and to girls early on, because so much of the seeds of gender-based violence happen in how we learn and internalize as young children. Our research and many others have found where boys witness violence against their mothers in the home, they're 3 times as likely to carry it out as adults. Women who witness violence as children are more likely to tolerate violence from a male partner as adults. So much of this happens in how we let it happen and teach boys and girls how to do it. Well, teach boys that violence is normal and girls to tolerate it. So I think finding the stake that we all have in preventing it and making very clear this is not inevitable, and we know things that can work to prevent it, I think are key. And if, I think from the global research and global experiences in violence prevention, one of the key ones is parent training. Programs that begin by engaging both, in a context of a heterosexual household, engaging both parents in non-violent ways of raising your children, in making very clear as well ways to negotiate as couples that don't involve use of violence, making clear to men there will be consequences if you use violence against a female partner. That kind of approach that says that we can start to do prevention in the household, we can continue it at school and at the workplace, we can continue it at the policy level, but I think the importance of starting at the household level, and which is why I think the training around and the partnership around the 2-generation programming that we'll be experimenting with here, which is really an innovation and is quite exciting. I think that is what around the world tells us that prevention can be and that it can work.
Great, thank you so much. Questions here? You're going to handle the mics? Thank you so much. And just tell us who you are, please, and what institution you're from, and then your comment or question.
This is Jafar from Yazda. I'm not trying to justify what we do as men, but I think that the equality should be like a universal right. It is not just related to genders and whatever. So as long as there are in the world, there are evil classes and holy classes, evil countries and holy countries. So it's not possible to think or to discuss about equality. So it's not enough to just advise people that we have to understand why females are victims. So to answer this question, we as males, we have developed violence as a mechanism to face the challenge in order to pass our genes.
Your very important comment around gender inequality is not the only injustice that we must look at. Looking at how the world order concentrates wealth and power in some places and not in others, the way borders are set up, the unacknowledged harm that many countries, mine included, has done to the world, I think clearly must be looked at as well. So we agree with you. This is not just if we resolve gender inequality at the household level, and yet we have huge economic and political inequalities, we've only gotten so far. So we see these as connected. The power of military, the harm that the militarization of so many social problems is creating, the way that stress from economic stress reverberates in households, these issues are all connected. So we absolutely agree with you on that. While we call out men for their use of harm, I think we must also continue to call out how governments have been part of perpetuating harm. So I agree with you on that.
And I would just add here that in the Kurdistan region, where we have people displaced from conflict in the rest of Iraq with ISIS, from the Syrian civil war, and also from decades of violence and persecution by the Saddam government, the Anfal campaign, Halabja, the chemical weapons attacks, and constant periods of violence and war, it takes a toll. And in this society of traditional norms where men have to be the protector and the financial provider, and men aren't able to do either when we're at war here in Kurdistan, I think that has resulted in increased levels of violence and men feeling like powerless in their lives and wanting to seek power in their homes. And so I think that is something that we've seen here, which is very affected by this recent wave of genocide, war, terrorism by ISIS.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and add to that the 2 years of a pandemic and the economic crises. We saw violence by men against women increase in homes. We saw men's and women's economic stability affected.
Sure.
So clearly, yeah, we see how much an understanding of that, of how economic stress affects violence in the home, and how men, often our conversations about power, kind of that men always have it, but to understand just men's very contradictory experiences of power and feeling powerless in a world that we don't, who controls what happens with the economy? Who controls whether a war happens against me? I think to understand those and to listen to men and women about those is a key part of this.
Thank you. Dimon from UNFPA was next, and then we can go to our SEED staffer. Sorry. Okay, then you're next.
Thank you very much for this engaging dialogue and discussion. I'm Shahnur Chaudhary. I'm from SEED Foundation. I work there as GBV Policy and Advocacy Advisor. We have received this research brief, and I was reading that and found that the findings are presented in 5 thematic areas. So I was interested to know from you whether the research also explored the participants' attitude towards violence against women and girls, because that's a very critical and important area of exploration. And if so, what are the key findings? And my second question is, did this research also use the intersectional lens to analyze the data? Thank you.
I might turn that question to Cody and the research team that led it.
Yeah, sure. So, as you'll see in the brief, it did cover mainly around violence against children and sort of the attitudes and behaviors around that. There wasn't a specific concentration on violence against women. However, what you can find in here are a lot of the norms and values that are sort of pertinent within the interviews of men are inequitable and do sort of illustrate that idea that power over is the way of the house and not so much women in public life and things like that. So there wasn't any findings particularly around that, but we are interested in sort of exploring that more, and obviously this project will certainly enlighten those topics. So thank you so much for your question.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Ms. Sherri and SEED, for inviting us to these very important and I think indeed needed discussion to have. So just I have one question and a clarification to add. So the question would be, in Iraq, we know that religious leaders or traditional leaders are playing a great role in influencing the community, especially young generations. So how has been your experience in engaging religious or traditional leaders in the efforts or the advocacies that you have been conducting in the countries that you have enrolled the program? And in the case of Iraq, generally, they play a great role in influencing and a lot of violence and decision, especially when it comes to the honor killing and some of the very recent cases that we have seen. The background and the influence was because of these religious, influential or traditional beliefs and thinking that have influenced the communities has happened. And for us, it's really important as UNFPA because we are currently working on developing a strategy. And we got really happy to get an expert, former Equimundo staff to support us in developing this strategy. And we are currently working on finalizing the strategy, and I hope that this strategy will inform good advocacy and initiative through involving government and relevant partners. And thank you very much for the very informative presentation. And tomorrow we are lucky again to get the chance to meet with Dr. Gary in UNFPA office, and I look forward to learn more about the experience that you have been doing and learn from it so that we can initiate more programming on engagement in Iraq. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the religious leaders question is a challenging one. These are, I think it is important to is it working?
Yeah.
To say these are frightening conversations to most religious leaders. Because we're proposing what feminist activists have proposed for a long time, which is to question power. And most religions are built on the idea that a few people at the top or a religious body holds the power. And we're proposing that by having a critical reflection about power, we can have better lives. This is frightening to most religions. There's always, though, some progressive leaders in any religion you look at who see the power of this and see it that it's not threatening to how they view the world, but in fact can sit very well with it. And so I think the question is, are there local religious leaders who see themselves as allies, who believe that in their religious principles they find a basis for believing that women are full human beings with the full set of rights that men have, and are they willing to put their name and their voice behind that? Most settings we can find religious leaders who do believe in that and who say, I don't find in my religion, whether that's Islam or Christianity or Judaism or whatever, that there's any scriptural basis for men's use of violence against women or for men's domination of all decision making or men's right to cause harm to others. So I think it's finding the dissent. And almost always there is. And so I think that's really the key. But I don't think we should assume this is not easy. These are probably the most difficult conversations in this field, is to find progressive religious leaders who aren't afraid of these challenging conversations.
And I think what we learn, thank you for that, what we learn through this program, I think can inform engagement with religious leaders. And, one of the reasons we named this program Healthy Families, Strong Communities is because we think that is appealing to most people, including religious and community leaders. They want healthy families and they want families to stay together. And with the rising violence that we see, I think religious community leaders here are concerned about rising divorce rate. Yeah. So we see a rising divorce rate and rising levels of violence reported from within the home. So when almost half of women are facing violence in their home, I think we are going to see rising divorce rates. So I think strong families, healthy families, strong communities are things that where we can find common ground, and are the views that we share. And hopefully, after piloting this approach, we can learn something that would be valuable to extend to these outreaches. Any other questions? The gentleman in the back. Oh, you have a question too? No, oh, you're going to sneak out? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Should I stand up? Hello everyone, this is Hassan. I'm the legal coordinator at Harikar NGO Duhok and legal task force coordinator at Duhok. Well, I have something to add it and then a question. Well, I first of all commend you for doing something and changing something that has been there for centuries, and I know it's a very hard work, but I have something to say that this issue, if I would say unhealthy masculinity, It has been there, and it's very hard to work on it. I know it's good to include men and boys in this so they can prevent it. But then I believe that there is more into it than we are discussing, because we have something that is feeding this idea of unhealthy masculinity, which is we have the provisions in the laws that are feeding this idea. Yeah. For example, we have provisions that doesn't give the wife to divorce, but gives the man. At the same time, obliged the man to provide for the family and doesn't oblige the woman. Those ideas gives power to this unhealthy masculinity that gives the man the upper hand of calling the shots in every situation. So my question is that, is there any other context that you're working on? Because I know it's very important, the laws to be changed in order for the community to change. I know it's vice versa, but do you work on that as well? Thank you.
We have done less direct work on that. We've done more advocacy on how policies can support healthy masculinities or men's involvement in positive ways. But we definitely partner with groups, women-led groups for the most part, that are looking at legal portions of laws or interpretations of laws or policies within government ministries that continue to reinforce men's power. Where we have worked more is looking at where do men support us as allies for changing the laws, so doing research on those questions. And the other is to look at ways that policies can be changed to encourage men to be more involved in certain levels. So parental leave laws, for example, where laws often exist to offer days off, as they should, for women when a child is born, to say what can we use in those laws that would encourage men to have time off to care for a child after a child is born. How do we use legal policies as well to say we must hold men accountable for violence they carry out, but how do we also build laws that say let's make prevention nationally mandated, so it's taught in schools, some of the examples you were just given. So I think while we look at how laws cause harm, we've also been trying to look at ways that laws can be part of promoting healthy ideas about masculinities. But I think you're absolutely right. The normative power of laws, and then the making sure that when we get laws passed that are more progressive, that in fact we do the training and the knowledge awareness so that in fact we're implementing the laws that exist. But I think you're absolutely right. We've done less of that. Yeah.
Well, here at SEED, we do have a very strong legislative agenda, and our goal is to strengthen laws that strengthen protections for women and children. Yep. So we have been working on the domestic violence law with a goal to expanding it to all women, whether the violence is within the family or outside the family, to protect violence wherever it happens to both women and men. We've also worked on technical input on the labor law to ensure that women have the same rights to work and are safe at work, safe from sexual harassment, abuse, and unfair treatment, that they have the same opportunities to work. We've also worked on survivor rights, on the Yazidi survivors law, the inclusion of children in that law, and hopefully personal status. We're working on recommendations and a campaign on the personal status law, are affecting identity of children and having women able to get identity documents for children. That's affecting civil documentation. So there's a broad range of legislation and policies that we're working on, and we think they must go alongside, but it's hard to affect laws, as we've seen with the debate around the DCVAL law this month. It's hard to affect change in the law when there's so much opposition, and at the root of those are gender inequality. And so we have to work on these kind of the views of people alongside of these legislative and policy and technical changes. So, another question? One more question? Okay. Do we have one more question? Yes, back here. Comment?
Yeah, I think like all the work around the law, and then all the things that you have suggested around working with men, whether, like younger men, older men, at school level, at community level, these are all important stuff. These it's all important. For these discussions to happen at some time. But our phones, these are the most dangerous things that are everyone in Kurdistan, they have it. You open TikTok, you open Instagram, you open Facebook, you open Twitter. It's terrifying. You find lots of people, promoting all these negative masculinities. They're all over the phone that everyone has access to it. Adolescent boys, I don't know, men at all ages. And then it makes the negative type of masculinity cool. But what do we have? Do we have something else? Do we have another alternative for people, for boys, when they open their phones? If they find one of these, ugly videos, is there anything else, in parallel that will, I don't know, help them change their mind a bit? I don't see this in my phone. Yeah. And then working with boys, at the school level, yes, it's important. And this could, I know, it's important, it will get us somewhere. But we need to be here. We need to be inside their phones. I think this was just my comment, and thank you.
Yeah. Now, it probably is the issue that we've been trying to think and ask about the most in the last months or last few years, is how do we achieve the impact that the negative messages that are there. And every time I think I know kind of who are the most powerful, sexist, misogynist voices online, there's 12 others who have come out of the meantime. We're not doing a very good job of policing or holding accountable what happens in online spaces. We've started to do some research with some of the groups that are based in California and Hollywood. We've now done 3 studies together with the Gina Davis Institute, led by the actress Gina Davis, looking at how TV, and also we did one study on how harmful masculinities are presented on gaming platforms. So at the very least, to begin to call out and say, look how often you present negative messages. The issue is they have billions and billions of dollars compared to our small abilities to do it. So what we believe is that we have to keep calling them out and saying, you see the harm that you're carrying out, you must be part of the change. There was an article in the New York Times, I think about a week ago, of one of the billionaire man who made lots of money in producing video games that he won't let his own daughters play. And he now left. I'm not sure if you saw that article. But essentially, how do we find those men who realize the business model they've been creating is based on causing harm and then building the algorithm that just repeats and repeats and repeats? How do we get them to see that they're causing harm and they need to be our allies? And they have the influence that we as NGOs, is really tough to build. So there is no easy answer to that one. We're trying to carry out research that at least calls out the harm that they're doing, but it's going to require a lot more. I was also followed the news in the UK, where the family that held Facebook accountable for their daughter had committed suicide, and she was finding all these negative messages around suicide where she could see people carrying out suicide. I think we need to keep doing that. We have to call out the power that companies that are making billions of dollars, because we all have their programs in our phones, we have to act as enlightened consumers of those and call them out. We haven't done that yet.
So I will just add something to that. Here, technology is often used to cause great harm, and all forms of gender-based violence are being exacerbated by social media, and it's ripe here in this environment where we have conservative social norms, and women in the public space, whether they're on social media or using messaging apps, or there's damaging photos out there. So we, in January, started with, under the UN GBV subcluster, a nationwide task force called the Technology Facilitated GBV Task Force, TFGBV, we're calling it. And I think we're one of the early organizations in the world that are trying to analyze and respond to this really harmful growing phenomenon of using technology to harm not just women and girls, but also boys and men. And so in our task force right now, SEED is and under programming supported by a technology company called IQNet and the State Department. We will be doing an assessment of how TFGBV takes place. What are the forms? We know we have a lot of image-based abuse. We have sexual exploitation, financial exploitation, huge levels of harassment, especially against female political figures. And so we're conducting this assessment. It's looking at the legal framework that exists here and globally to see what we can draw from. It'll look at the prevalence and the type of TFGBV that people are experiencing here and make some policy recommendations on how to address that. And we've recently met with DCVOW to talk about some of these subjects. So that's happening. We are engaging some of the big global companies like Meta, who is here working with us to try to create stronger complaints mechanisms to address harmful norms and also do some prevention and training of NGOs that get these kinds of cases. So we're really launching a lot of work, and I would definitely recommend you talk to the staff here if you'd like to join our task force, because we need really active members. We are seeking membership from organizations all across Iraq, and we knew that the GBV subcluster would be ending in the end of December. So our task force is a voluntary task force that will continue beyond that, and we have a very robust agenda. So thank you for raising that issue, and it's very much something that we need to think about, how to use technology to spread awareness on the positive fronts and to empower people to use it for really positive ways. And we're doing that through our outreach and empowerment program, Seed Girls, with young women. We're also doing parenting sessions, parent sessions of these young girls, so they can also help keep their daughters safe, and how young women can keep themselves safe online. But we can also think about how to do that with boys and men.
Yeah.
So I think we're at the end of our show here. We're really excited about this new program, Gary, and to launch into this next phase where we're working directly with communities. We're really pleased that you all came to hear this discussion today. We're grateful for Cody and Gary to be with us and to launch the training of our team and to launch these activities. And we're really grateful for your insights. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our VIP guest and our donors at the State Department for supporting this really important work. Not everybody supports this long-term investment in gender equality, and I think it's very unique that the U.S. government is doing that, and we want to thank you. And thanks for coming, and you're always welcome here. I think we really appreciate your global insights and your experiences. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.